That Lass O Lowrie's by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Chapter 8. Old Sammy Craddock rose from his chair and going to the mantelpiece took down a tobacco jar of red and yellow delft and proceeded to fill his pipe with solemn ceremony. It was a large, deep clay pipe and held a great deal of tobacco, particularly when filled from the store of an acquaintance. "It's a good enough pipe to borrow with," Sammy was wont to remark with gravity. In the second place, Mr. Craddock drew forth a goodly portion of the weed and pressed it down with ease and precision into the top of the foreign gentleman's turban, which constituted the bowl. Then he lighted it with a piece of paper, remarking to his wife, between long indrawn puffs, "I'm going to public." The good woman did not receive the intelligence as amicably as it had been given. She even replied with tartness. "Aye," she said, "I'll warrant thou'rt. When thou'rt not filling thy belly, thou'rt generally either going to public or coming home. Riggin 'ud go to ruin if thou'rt weren't at the public from morn till neat, looking after other folks' business. It's well for the town as thou's getting nowt else to do." Sammy puffed away at his pipe without any appearance of disturbance. "Aye," he consented dryly, "it is that. It'd be a bad thing to have the pit stop working, or because I hadn't attended to 'em and given the maisters a bit of encouragement. They sees mine's what gentlefolk call a responsible position in society. The biggest trouble I have is settling in my mind what the world'll do when I turn me toes to the daisies, and how the government'll make up their minds who shall have the honour of paying for me monument." In Mr. Craddock's opinion, his skill in the solution of political and social problems was only equalled by his aptitude in managing the weaker sex. He regarded the feminine world with tolerance. He never lost his temper with a woman. He might be sarcastic. He was sometimes even severe in his retorts, but he was never violent. In anyone else but Mr. Craddock, such conduct might have been considered weak by the male population of Wriggin, who not infrequently settled their trifling domestic difficulties with the poker and tongs, chairs or flat irons, or indeed with any portable piece of household furniture. But Mr. Craddock's way of disposing of feminine antagonists was tolerated. It was pretty well known that Mrs. Craddock had a temper, and since he could manage her, it was not worthwhile to criticise the method. "Thou art an old yammerhead," said Mrs. Craddock, as oracularly as if she had never made the observation before. "Thou deserves what thou's na gettin'." "Aye, that I do," with an air of humble regret. "Thou'rt reet there for once in thy life. The country hasna done its duty by me. If I'd had all I deserved, I'd be Lord Mayor of London by this time, and thou'd ha' been Lady Mayoress, sitting up in thy parlour with a gold crown atop of thy head, sorting out thy clothes for wishwomen instead of dolling out thy bits of duds for this hen. Thou'rt reet, old lass, thou'rt reet enough." "Go thy ways to the public," retorted the old dame, driven to desperation. "I'm tired of hearkening to thee. Get thee gone to public. I wish to have the world standing still. And mind thou doesna set the horse ponds afire as thou goes by 'em." "I'll be careful, old lass," chuckled Sammy, taking his stick. "I'll be careful for sake o' town." He made his way towards the village alehouse in the best of humours. Arriving at the Crown, he found a discussion in progress. Discussions were always being carried on there, in fact, but this time it was not Craddock's particular friends who were busy. There were grades even among the visitors at the Crown, and there were several grades below Sammy's. The lowest was composed of the most disreputable of the colliers, men who, with Lowrie at their head, were generally in some mischief. It was these men who were talking together loudly this evening, and as usual Lowrie was the loudest in the party. They did not seem to be quarrelling. 3 or 4 sat round a table listening to Lowrie, with black looks, and towards them Sammy glanced as he came in. "What's up with them fellies?" he asked of a friend. "Summat's wrong at pit," was the answer. "I canna mak out what, missen. Summat about one at Meister's as they're out with. What'll that tack out, lad?" "A pint of 6penny." And then with another sidelong glance at the debaters, "They're an ill set, that lot, and up to summat ill too, I'll warrant. He's not the reet sort, that Lowrie." Lowrie was a burly fellow with a surly, sometimes ferocious expression. Drink made a madman of him, and amongst his companions he ruled supreme through sheer physical superiority. The man who quarrelled with him might be sure of broken bones, if not of something worse. He leaned over the table now, scowling as he spoke. "I'll have no lads meddling and setting masters again me," Craddock heard him say. "Them and you as likes to tack cheap mun tack it. I'm too oud a bird for that sort of feed. It sticks in my crop. Look thee out of that there window, Jock, and watch who passes. I'll punch that lad into middle of next week as sure as he goes by." "Well," commented one of his companions, "all I've gotten to say is, as there'll be like to have a punch on it, for he's a strapping youngster, and no one so easy feart." "Dost I mean to say as I canna do it?" demanded Lowrie fiercely. "Nay, nay, mon," was the pacific and rather hasty reply. "Nowt at sort. I only meant that it was not every mon as could." "Aye, to be sure," said Sammy testily to his friend. "That's the game, is it? There's a feat on hand. That's reet, me lads. Lay in thy beer, and mak damn fools o' thy sens, and thou'll get a chance to sleep on th' soft side of a paving stone in lock-ups." He had been a fighting man himself in his young days, and had prided himself particularly upon showing his muscle in Wigan parlance, but he had never been such a man as Lowrie. His comparatively gentlemanly encounters with personal friends had always been fair and square, and in many cases had laid the foundation for future toleration, even amiability. He had never hesitated to tack a punch at an offending individual, but he had always been equally ready to shake hands when all was over, and in some cases, when having temporarily closed a companion's eyes in the heat of an argument, had been known to lead him to the counter of the public and bestow nectar upon him in the form of 6penny. But of Lowrie even the fighting community, which was the community predominating in Wigan, could not speak so well. He was ill-farrant and revengeful, ready to fight, but not ready to forgive. He had been known to bear a grudge and remember it when it had been forgotten by other people. His record was not a clean one, and accordingly he was not a favourite of Sammy Craddock's. A short time afterwards somebody passed the window facing the street, and Lowrie started up with an oath. "There he is," he exclaimed. "Now for it. I thought he'd go this road. I'll see what tha's getting to say for thysen, me lad." He was out in the street almost before Craddock and his companion had time to reach the open window, and he had stopped the passer-by, who paused to confront him haughtily. "Why," cried Sammy, slapping his knee, "I'm domned if it isn't the London engineer chap." Fergus Derrick stood before his enemy with anything but a proprietary air. That this brutal fellow, who had caused him trouble enough already, should interfere with his progress in the street was too much for his high spirit to bear. "I come out here," said Lowrie, in a brutal, significant tone, "to see if tha'd ought to say to me." "Then," replied Fergus, "you may go in again, for I have nothing." Lowrie drew a step nearer to him. "Are thou sure of that?" he demanded. Thou wert so ready with thy gab about the Davies this morning, I thought happen tha'd like to say summat more, if a mon 'ud give you a chance. But happen again you're one 'at sort o' sticks to gab, and goes no further." Derrick's eyes blazed. He flung out his open hand in a contemptuous gesture. "Out of the way," he said, in a suppressed voice, "and let me pass." But Lowrie only came nearer, his fury growing at the other's high-handedness. "Nay, but I wunna," he said, "until I've said my say. Thou wert gonna make me obey rules or let the meisters hear on it, weren't thou? Thou wert going to keep thy eye on me and report when time come, weren't thou? Well, the time hasna come yet, and now I'm going to give thee a thrashing." He sprang upon him with a ferocity and force which would have flung to the earth any man who had not possessed the thews and sinews of a lion. Derrick managed to preserve his equilibrium. All the power of his fiery nature rushed to his rescue. After the first blow, he could not control himself. Naturally, he had longed to thrash this fellow soundly often enough, and now that he had been attacked by him, he felt forbearance to be no virtue. Brute force could best conquer brute nature. He felt that he would rather die 1,000 deaths than be conquered himself. He put forth all his strength in an effort which wakened the crowd, which had speedily surrounded them, Owd Sammy among the number, to wild admiration. "Get thee into it, lad," cried the old sinner, in an ecstasy of approbation. "Get thee unto it. Thou'rt shapping right, I see. Why, I'm dommed," slapping his knee as usual, "I'm dommed if he isna going to mill Dan Lowrie." To the amazement of the bystanders, it became evident in a very short time that Lowrie had met his match. Finding it necessary to defend himself, Derrick was going to do something more. The result was that the breathless struggle for the mastery ended in a crash, and Lowrie lay upon the pavement, Fergus Derrick standing above him, pale, fierce, and panting. "Look to him," he said to the men about him in a white heat, "and remember that the fellow provoked me to it. If he tries it again, I will try again too," and he turned on his heel and walked away. He had been far more tolerant even in his wrath than most men would have been, but he had disposed of his enemy effectually. The fellow lay shinned upon the ground, looking unpleasant enough. In his fall he had cut his head upon the curbstone, and the blood streamed from the wound when his companions crowded near and raised him. Owd Sammy Craddock offered no assistance. He leaned upon his stick and looked on with grim satisfaction. "Thou's getting what thou deserved, owd lad," he said in an undertone, "and thou's getting no more. I Stoke London chap one for this un. He's done a bit o' work as I'd ha' taken in on mysen long ago, if I'd ha' been 30 years younger and a bit less stiff in thinges." Fergus had not escaped without hurt himself, and the first angry excitement over, he began to feel so sharp an ache in his wrist that he made up his mind to rest for a few minutes at Grace's lodgings before going home. It would be wise to know the extent of his injury. Accordingly, he made his appearance in the parlour, somewhat startling his friend, who was at supper. "My dear Fergus," exclaimed Paul, "how excited you look!" Derrick flung himself into a chair, feeling rather dubious about his strength all at once. "Do I?" he said with a faint smile. "Don't be alarmed, Grace. I have no doubt I look as I feel. I have been having a brush with that scoundrel Lowrie, and I believe something has happened to my wrist." He made an effort to raise his left hand, and failed, succumbing to a pain so intense that it forced an exclamation from him. "I thought it was a sprain," he said, when he recovered himself, "but it's a job for a surgeon. It's broken." And so it proved under the examination of the nearest practitioner, and then Derrick remembered a certain wrench and shock he had felt in Lowrie's last desperate efforts to recover himself. Some of the small bones had broken. The Reverend Paul was disturbed beyond measure. He called in the surgeon himself and stood by during the strapping and bandaging with an anxious face, really suffering as much as Derek, perhaps a trifle more. He would not hear of his going home that night, but insisted that he should remain where he was. "I can sleep on the lounge myself," he protested, "and there I shall be obliged to leave you for half an hour. I assure you I shall not be away a longer time." "Where are you going?" asked Derek. "To the rectory. Mr. Barham sent a message an hour ago that he wished to see me upon business." Fergus agreed to remain. When Grace was on the point of leaving the room, he turned his head. "You are going to the rectory, you say?" he remarked. "Yes. Do you think you shall see a niece?" "It is very probable," confusedly, and looking a little nervously startled. "I merely thought I would ask you not to mention this affair to her," said Derek. The curate's face assumed an expression at that moment which it was well that his friend did not see. A shadow of bewilderment and anxiety fell upon it, and the colour faded away. "You think," faltered he. "Well, I thought that perhaps it would shock or alarm her," answered Derek. "She might fancy it to be a more serious matter than it was." "Very well, I think you are right, perhaps," and he went out with the shadow still on his face.